Counted was born out of questions that arose after the death of Mike Brown in Ferguson. The debate around whether minorities are disproportionately represented in the number of people that are killed by the police really can't be answered unless you have a statistical backbone to tell that story with.
There is no comprehensive count or database or record of everyone who is killed by police in the US. We decided that starting in 2015 we would count everyone. If somebody dies and we learn about it, the first thing to do is to verify that this has happened, and so usually it involves a call to the police, and often they will tell very little. But we stay in contact. We call again, we call the coroner's office in many cases, we find out the name from local sources or local media reporting. And as we do this, we input data into our database.
For local news, for all of the great reporting they do, they are sort of bound by the fact that as a local reporter who's reporting criminal justice, you need a relationship with the police department. It needs to be pretty functional and it has to be somewhat cordial. But as a national outlet, you really have the ability to be a little more aggressive in terms of trying to suss out some of these stories that are happening with police in different communities.
I think there was a big challenge in getting the right tone for this piece. And I think the team really put their heads together strongly to think about that design element and make it kind of respectful and somber enough, yet something people actually want to explore and go into and learn more about.
When we first launched The Counted, June last year, within a month of launching that interactive, we had a community of 30,000 people built up. That's a huge community in a short period of time that was informing what we were doing every day. So we were taking that information, our reporters were verifying that information, and we wouldn't have been able to do that without the community involvement, and we knew that from the beginning that we needed to fold that into how we would build this project.
People on Facebook, on Twitter, and using our website submit tips to us and try to help us get more accurate data, more accurate counting and reporting on these people.
My son was killed in Portsmouth, Virginia at a Walmart store by an officer who didn't question him or get in contact with his mother.
Very soon after we began the investigation, we came across a case of a man named William Chapman. He had been killed by police in strikingly similar circumstances to Michael Brown, who is a household name after what happened in Ferguson. We shared some national media attention on it, and then later in the year, the officer involved was actually charged with murder.
So by the end of 2015, we'd counted over 1,100 deaths over the past year, and we were able to say with absolute certainty that African American men aged between 15 and 34 were 9 times more likely than any other demographic in the United States to be killed by the police. Now that statistic wasn't around before we started counting it.
As the year progressed, we decided that we wanted to look more in depth. We wanted to dig deeper into these trends and the places where these things were happening.
And what we did was we did a county by county search and found out that Kern County in California had the highest rate of officer-involved deaths in the United States.
It was a story that we really could only get by looking at the database as a whole. It became pretty clear that they were killing a disproportionate amount of people compared to every other law enforcement agency in the US.
We kind of concluded that local media had usually noted each death, but they hadn't really taken a step back and seen the bigger picture. And so I think it took an outsider's view to come into this county, to look at what was going on and to see it in the round. So since we started, the government has sat up and taken notice. In October, James Comey, the director of the FBI, said publicly that it was unacceptable that we and the Washington Post, who have a similar project just devoted to shootings, unacceptable that we had better data than his own team. He said he was going to do something about it. And sure enough, by the end of the year, the FBI had announced that it would overhaul its voluntary reporting system that had been kind of discredited by our project.
So obviously the federal government haven't actually delivered on their promise to reform these new counting practices. So we've decided that we're going to keep on doing it until we see what they come up with. This project started out from a very fundamental and basic public service need, and until that is met and we're satisfied that it's been met, we're going to keep on doing it.
I'm really proud of how we can be a distinctive voice in the United States. These are stories that haven't been told, they're stories that need to be told, and I think that our journalism at Guardian US has really done that.
It's really impossible to have a discussion about law enforcement and race and use of force without having any data behind it. So now that we have data, we really you really do know, who is being affected by police violence. We can kind of move from there to decide if we as a nation are comfortable with the number of people being killed and who those people are.
You see the impact of that work when you sit down in a living room with a family of someone who's been killed by the police, and they show you pictures of them and they tell you stories about what it was like watching them grow up and about their kids and about their hopes and their dreams. A story can get 200,000 page views and that's great, but the real satisfaction comes from, when someone who's gone through that looks at you and says, "Thank you, no one else cared about our story."